Welcome back, guys. So we're working on this Fiat 500, trying to pull the transmission so that we could do the clutch. We're almost there, but it turns out, if you look at the bottom here, that bar does not want to come out like I wanted it to. So we're going to have to come in through the front and take off the bumper. So a lot of little bolts. Let's get started. So, looks like to get this bar out, we had to get to these front bolts, and the only way to do that was to partially remove the bumper. So there's really not much to it. You have a bunch of T30 Torx bits. You have one kind of hidden up here on the corner. Don't miss that one. And then, as you see here, we have these little tabs. I decided to take it off so you could kind of get a better idea. But there's 3 spots where if you take a little screwdriver or like a little hook tool, you should be able to pop everything up here off. So here you got your 3 tabs. So this I kind of went in from the inside. And then you got a whole bunch of the Torx bits on the bottom, I think 3 or 4. And then you got another 4 on the top here. And make sure you do all your electrical connectors. I undid, I think, the horn. I undid the headlight, the fog light. I pulled the bulb out here. That was easy enough. You just give it a little twist. There's our bulb. And that gets enough of the bumper off where I think we're going to be okay. I don't think we're going to have to deal with the other side. So let's keep on going. And there we have it, folks. We got enough room, I think, to drop this this puppy out. So just a heads up, get it from this side. This side is welded on, so you're not going to get too far, which is why we had to take the bumper off again. So you want to get kind of part of the wheel well cover off. There's like 3 screws. Then make sure you don't forget this top guy. You got to get from the inside. Make sure you get your electrical connectors, all the top T30 Torx, all the bottom T30 Torx, and it worked out, you know. This guy pulled forward. You know, make sure you get your plastic tabs up here, and that should give you enough clearance. I kind of left this bumper hanging, but I mean, you might want to like zip tie something up here so it doesn't fall down. You get this bracket out, and now we just have to pull the rest of this apart. It's going to be a bunch of housing bolts. They go either into the engine side or into the trans side, so you can see them, all the ones bordering, all the ones on the outside here. Once those are all out, we're going to get our trans bracket as well. I'm going to get a trans jack underneath this, and we'll continue on from there. Alright, so we're back underneath the vehicle here. Put a jack stand with a rubber block to hold the engine up. I took our little dog bone here off. It was a little difficult. We have this bolt and nut that goes all the way through. Nuts here. And that's going to go through this here on both sides of this hole. Now to get the bolt out, our exhaust was getting in the way, which made it a little difficult. So I came back here. If you look, so here's our metal guy. There's another bolt right on the other side of the exhaust pipe. Right there. A little tough to see. But by undoing that, that gave me just enough room to slip it out. So now, I gotta go to the top, undo the top of the trans mount, and then bell housing and slip this puppy off. Looks like we got plenty of room now to get this out. Alright guys. So if you've been following this video, we're onto our housing bolts. We got 2 down here. So you can see I marked them with paint. We got 1 here, 1 up there. We have 1 down here above that white paint mark. That one's a little bit tough to see, so don't forget about that. That covers the front end. Then we go underneath, and we don't want to forget, looks like this bolt here, we're going to have to pop that off too. And then, all that is said and done, our transmission should be pretty much loose from the engine. At that point, we're going to get a jack underneath the transmission to keep it stable, and we're going to take off the 3 bolts for our trans mount. And then we're probably going to take off these top 2 as well, and then pull that whole trans mount out, which should give us some more room. Once that's done, we're going to kind of wiggle this thing out while it's on top of the jack. Should pull straight out, and then we should have access to our clutch. Lots of fun, guys. Alright guys, so we're making progress. I have a jack stand with a rubber block holding up the bumper. Got a jack stand with a rubber block holding up the engine. I have our transmission held by yet a 3rd jack, and I loosened up our mount from the top, these 2 bolts. And I decided to give us a little more room to get these 3 off. Since we can't really get to them straight on, I figured I could lower the trans a little bit, and that should give me enough room to get these 3 off, and in general give me enough room to slide this thing out. So hopefully this works. Alright my friends, that's absolutely correct. Now you're going to want to loosen up the 2 or 3 pan bolts, or the dust cover bolts, towards your backside, which is this side. There's 2 of them. One little guy there, one little guy here. I think this guy was the shorter one of the 2. And then there's the bracket that came in over here. There's 3 bolts. I thought I could get away without taking off that bracket. I was wrong. This is that bracket. It's a 19 millimeter. There's a nut on the other side. So once all that was off, and we got our trans bracket on the top off, she slipped right out. Now I had to kind of get under there and shimmy it around quite a bunch, but it came out. So now we're going to be looking up here, and that is our pressure plate. So we're going to want to take all the bolts from around there, maybe mark this stuff up before we do, and yeah, pull our clutch plate out and take a look at our flywheel. Should be nothing to it. So now that we got the transmission out, we're going to look up here by our pressure plate. The clutch disc is sitting right behind these fingers here. And to get these off, we're going to go back to our T30 Torx. Now the trick to this, you want to go in a star motion, kind of like you're doing lug nuts, and only loosen them a little bit at a time, and just keep going around in the circle in a star until they're off. And then this whole thing is going to drop down, and we're going to take a look at our flywheel. So here we have our clutch disc, as well as the pressure plate. That's what we were just looking at with the fingers. And this is our flywheel. Now, typically I would recommend getting this cut or possibly replacing it. This thing actually seems like it's in pretty decent shape, but looks a little dirty. So we're going to clean this puppy up, and then going to start putting this back together. So before we get too crazy here, we want to pull out our throwout bearing. Nothing to it. You can see on the back here, there's these little shiny divots. That's where it's going to ride, on these little edges. And then it does kind of snap into place, these little clips here. But I'm actually going to clean this up, add some lubricant, and put in our new bearing. So here we have it, guys. We started to put our new clutch in. Pretty simple. You just got to make sure that you line up all your bolts the same way they were before. Kind of start to get them in sort of like a star pattern. Use your clutch alignment tool to make sure that your clutch plate is actually lined up nice and center in there. And then these guys you're going to want to torque down to 14 Newton meters. So we're going to get all that torqued down, and we're going to put this transmission back in. Alright, so we're making some more progress here. This transmission isn't very heavy. What I ended up doing was I just got underneath this thing and bench pressed it up. There's one stud that hangs off the back, which actually made it pretty easy to line up. No way for me to show you where that stud is now, but if you remember taking that nut off towards the back here, I basically lined that stud up through the hole, managed to push it in, and and we got lucky. Everything was lined up right. So I started putting in some of the housing bolts. I got our now green ground strap here, put in our slave cylinder, took the zip tie off of this before pushing this through. So that's all good. We have the bracket in the back for our shift cables. Pretty much going to be doing this in the reverse order that we took it all apart. That being said, we have that bar in the back on the transmission. That was one of the last things we took off. That I think is going to be the next thing I do here. So I'm going to start piecing this back together, and I'll come back to add new fluid in just a bit. Well guys, as you can see here, everything's coming along pretty well. I got our transmission mount up here nice and bolted up, so I don't need my jack anymore. Started working on the bell housing. If I had any advice at all for you guys, make sure that there's no brackets or anything jammed up in the top of that bell housing before putting all these bolts back in. Make them real snug. Don't forget all your little brackets, including, you know, our little pain in the butt guy over here on the back side. I just put the starter back in now. Got to get the electrical hooked up with that, but we're moving right along. I think we're looking pretty good. All right, so we're definitely making some headway here. Reattached the bumper, all of our lights, all of our connections. We got our skid plate here, or weather guard, whatever. So now we're going to put the axles back in and fill it with fluid. So this is pretty straightforward. You just pop them back in, bend them around, get the other end in here. We're going to want to torque the axle nut at the end of all this. And then we're going to fill it up. It should be good to go. Alright guys, so we got our axles back in. They're looking good. Sorry it's a little dark. But they are in. I just got to tighten up the axle nuts, put the wheels and tires back on. Before we get into all that, we want to take some OEM fluid here, and our drain plug is right on the front side of the transmission. So if you're looking, here's your front bumper, literally right behind it. So we're going to basically take our handy dandy pump here and pump it until it starts weeping out of this hole, and then we're going to put our plug back in. This 12 millimeter hex, in case any of you guys are wondering. So we're going to do that last step, and then we're going to take this thing for a spin. So we're almost there. The last step, we want to take our battery box, put that back in. You got one nut down here, 2 bolts. You got 4 bolts on the back of this, or 4 nuts I should say, by the computer. Then you're going to want to put your skid plate back on, put the battery in. Don't forget to torque down the lug nuts and your axle nuts. Definitely don't forget to do that. Next step, test drive. Well, there we have it, guys. Everything is back together. The test drive went smooth. Shifts great. Now, I should point out, I end up having to do this job twice. Don't buy a cheap Chinese clutch on the internet. These things are known to have problems with their clutches, and the first one that I put in would not disengage. And another thing to look at, the shifter cables, another common issue on these. The bushings on the end, right by that 3-bolt bracket near the starter, yeah, those were toast too. And definitely something you want to get taken care of before you put the battery box and everything back together. So other than that, she shifts great. It's awesome. Hope you had fun. I know I did. We'll catch you guys on the next one.